Hi, how you doing? Before I get into this, I'd like to say a few things. Boxers hit harder than anyone else. Boxers are more likely to knock you out than anyone else, and the rapid combinations that some boxers throw are absolutely devastating. But I stand by the title of this video 100%. So before we dive into this video properly, I need to give you a little context. Because anyone can throw a statement like the one I made around, but if you don't understand the context of that statement, then everything else is utterly irrelevant. So when I say that boxers can't punch, what is it that I actually mean? Modern boxers have a number of advantages that over the years they've learned to maximise. In effect, their punching ability has grown exponentially, entirely down to the mechanical advantages that they gain from two things: hand wraps and gloves. And without these things, the punching used in boxing begins to fall apart. As an aside, I feel the need to point out that I'm fully aware that there is no one single way of punching used by boxers. We can look at things like hand alignment, guard position, the position of the hand not currently striking, and we can find a massive amount of variation in all of them, and many more things besides. However, all punching methodology from boxing is based on a foundation of wearing wraps and gloves. And they change the game enough that when you take those things away, it becomes a problem. So let's start by looking at the anatomy of the hand and arm. Hands are amazing things. There are 27 bones in the hand, 8 carpals, 5 metacarpals and 14 phalanges. The carpals and metacarpals make up the body of the hand itself, and the phalanges the fingers and thumb. Each bone articulates with the others around it. The joints of the fingers move quite freely, whereas the joints between the carpals, the small irregular bones of the hand, move very little. They're held together by a complex system of ligaments that gives us the structural integrity and the agile movement we need to be able to use our hands. It's entirely because of the fantastic dexterity of the human hand that we're able to carry out the fine, complex motor movements we need to in order to function properly. Because of this, our hands make terrible weapons. When we bunch them up in a fist and use that to club another person, we put ourselves at a high risk of injury that can be painful, debilitating, and in the worst cases, even life-changing. Boxing gloves take the impact of the fist and spread it over a wider surface area, reducing the forces that are transmitted through any specific part of the hand. In doing this, they make injuries to the bones or ligaments of the hand less likely. But they don't rule it out completely. Hand wraps work in a different, complementary, and at least to me, much more interesting way. This is going to feel a little like a massive tangent, but bear with me, it will all make sense, I'm sure. In 1967, a trauma surgeon in Miami by the name of Augusto Sarmiento came up with an interesting theory for treating complex fractures of long bones. He proposed that if the soft tissues, the skin, muscles, blood vessels, etc., around a broken bone were compressed inside a closely fitting plaster cast, or brace, they'd hold the bone in place enough that the joints on either side of the break could be left free to move, without causing any damage to the original injury. If he was right, it would speed up rehabilitation and significantly reduce long-term complications. The research first he and then many other people did showed that he was absolutely right. The hydraulic pressure created by this form of bracing actually increases the support it gives to the vulnerable area as pressure through the bone increases. Sarmiento's system of functional bracing began to be used in treating injuries that would otherwise need complex and costly surgery to fix, and has now been adopted worldwide in trauma care. This principle of compressing the soft tissues around bones in order to support and hold them in place is exactly what hand wraps do for boxers' hands. They compress the soft tissues of the hands and in doing so provide significant support to the bones, allowing them to bear more force than they would otherwise be able to without breaking. This support to the structure of the hand from wraps, along with the diffuse distribution of pressure from gloves, allows boxers to be able to hit harder and faster than they otherwise would be able to without risking injury. They allow boxers a lot of leeway in which part of the hand contacts their opponent, and because of this, they allow them to target areas of their opponent that would otherwise be likely to cause damage to the hand. But of course, as you've undoubtedly figured out by now, there's a downside to this. When you remove the gloves and the hand wraps, you take away the extra support that allows a boxer to hit without damaging their hands. If they then punch using the same technique, they're at serious risk of injury to their hands, most specifically to the metacarpals. Because the hand is wider at the metacarpophalangeal joint than it is at the carpometacarpal joint, that means that the long bones of the metacarpals are not parallel, and that if a force from a punch landing is transmitted down them slightly out of line, they're likely to break. The most common place this happens is at the finger end of the fifth metacarpal. The wide section of bone at the end simply snaps off the narrower shaft. The mechanism of this is so predictable, it's known in orthopaedics as a boxer's fracture. So how do we overcome this issue? There's always a trade-off in punching between accuracy and power. The more power you generate, the less precise you run the risk of being. This isn't really a big problem when your hands are so well supported. But in bare-knuckle systems, this can be a big issue. What would be a glancing blow doing no great harm to either person in boxing could be exactly what causes you to break one or more of the bones of your hand in bare-knuckle. Conversely, the more accurate and precise you are with your striking, the less power you tend to generate. Focusing on precision allows us to ensure that any forces transmitted through the hand and arm are absorbed in a way that minimises the risk of injury. This is why in systems where horizontal fist alignment is preferred, the point of impact is almost always the first two knuckles. We see this in various forms of Eastern martial arts, most famously the styles of karate originating in Okinawa. It's also why the bare-knuckle fighters of the pugilistic period who used a vertical fist alignment aimed to contact with the middle two or bottom three knuckles. This allows the forces to be transmitted most safely through the bones of the hand into the arm and then into the body. We see this in various systems, but no one describes it as well as Jack Dempsey in his book Championship Fighting. He describes this as the power line and advises you to always aim with the second knuckle, the one next to your pinky, and let the other knuckles take care of themselves. And so, if we go back to the original statement I made in the title of this video, boxers can't punch, we can see that the criteria I'm using to define a good, or indeed a poor punch, is not power, but precision and accuracy. This focus on accuracy and precision over power is exactly why fights before the Marquis of Queensberry's rules were adopted tended to go on for such a long time. It's how fighters managed to fight for an hour or more in contests made up of dozens of rounds. It's how professional fighters were able to fight so often. And it's why explosive knockouts were a rarity. It's also why modern bare-knuckle boxing promotions that allow hand wraps aren't really bare-knuckle at all. It's why we see such a lot of standard modern boxing technique in them. So now over to you. Do you agree with what I've said, or have I missed the point entirely? Do boxers punch best? Is power more important than precision, regardless of the risk of injury? Stick something in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this video, or it's just made you think a little about what you do in a slightly different way, then you'll probably enjoy the other videos I've made, and the ones I'm going to be making in the future. Please consider subscribing if that's the case. Also, you may notice that under the video there's a new thanks button. That allows you to directly support me to make more frequent videos. There's no obligation, but I've always been pretty poor at maintaining a Patreon page properly, and this is another option that has no ongoing monthly commitment. I want to finish with a massive shout out to my fight team. You know who you are. You rock.